And so attack prevention are the practices and the tools that organizations put into place to ensure attacks are mitigated. And they do this by reducing the likelihood that an actual attack occurs in the first place. So our panelists will continue to the discussion into how the IT and security landscape is shifting, and how this shift presents new challenges and to an organization, and how the security architecture and paradigm is evolving to be able to mitigate these threats and reduce the vulnerabilities within an organization. We'll hear from Bob Turner from Fortinet, followed by Andrew Merica from Cisco. So Bob is a field CISO with Fortinet. He's in his previous role, he was the CISO for the University of Wisconsin, and prior to that was in the security consulting for over 15 years, and then in a previous life served in the U.S. Navy for over 20 years. So I think Bob can kind of talk about his experience and his role at Fortinet before he goes into his presentation about regarding attack prevention, and then we'll hear from Andrew. And Andrew's a solutions engineer with Cisco, and he has over 12 years of experience in technical systems area. So similar to, I think we had Greg and Cole in the last panel, where we're going to have multiple different viewpoints and into the security landscape and how to solve security challenges. And Andrew's also served in the U.S. Air Force, so we have two military guys in this panel. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob if he's on the. I can see him on the panel, and Bob, go ahead and introduce yourself and begin the presentation. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And for those who did the math real quick, it's been over 40 years since I've been in information security in some form or another. Yeah, I want to talk today about preventing attacks and sort of from a bit of a historical view at first. So if we could go ahead and have that first slide, please. Right. So, we need to set aside the old bastion defense mindset where, the crown jewels were locked in a safe in a guarded room inside of a complex castle with a moat and drawbridge. And no, I did not start my career with a moat and a drawbridge. I just want to point that out real quick. But our network and security architectures have to shift and allow for less complexity and promote easy but secure access to data. Wherever it lives, works, or plays. Data centers are becoming more of a complex intersection. If you could click the image forward there one more time. So this represents what your average data center sort of looks like today, where you still have those components that are within the data center, but your remote connections are really connecting to the SaaS directly, to the public cloud directly, and then of course everything else is still on campus. But where we're really at and where we're headed is that you're connecting from anywhere and you're connecting to anywhere in the mesh. And I think it's important to understand that that's the complexity of security as we know it today, and that's going to be the challenge, I think, for the coming years as time moves on. So our network complexities do tend to change the attack surface, and really here I'm thinking the attack surface is quite different than it was from the traditional boundary perimeter, even as little as 10 years ago, where all the devices went to the internet through maybe a single point connection or maybe several POP connections inside of an organization. Today the perimeter is everywhere and users are more mobile, and billions of connected devices have created new edges that require protection. So to have the best protection, security, and networking, we really need to converge into that security-driven networking model, the third and current generation of cybersecurity, if you want to call it that. Weaving into security a new functionality extends across the networks, no matter where the data or where the devices live. So I guess I want to talk a little bit about sort of the new wave, and that's zero trust. Zero trust access enables organizations to see and control everybody and everything on the network, whether or in the organization, whether on or off the proper organizational network. And then of course that third little pillar there is adaptive cloud security, which means you can secure any application and your data that's in the cloud. It's really important to understand that in your modern security posture, this is where you're headed. You're headed to the, driving it so that security is really up front in the architecture, and you're embracing cloud all over the place. So to introduce Zero Trust, I want to first emphasize that this is not the absence of trust, but more like ensuring access to those people and components needed to get the work done. In its simplest form, Zero Trust access continually verifies that access is authorized and that the actor is verifiably the right person to get to the data or to access the system resource. Zero Trust is effective in that the concept of least privilege is bolstered by achieving minimal access and segmentation, which means control can be granular as long as it accommodates sufficient work and adjusts for principles that are often sourced and managed independently. And finally, we need to make sure that we're treating our resources as if they are already breached. And this is sort of a mindset shift from the standard network, but it is reality. So many people try to think of Zero Trust as just something new. It's the next fad, but if you think about it, it is really a function of business drivers, and it truly is a business issue to embrace Zero Trust. But even as we continue the quest to find normal, we have to embrace our diversity in work, which drives the need for diversity in access. Working from anywhere has become our norm, but working from anywhere will remain the norm in a lot of analyst predictions. So users need access that's not really impacted by location. So as we're all partners in that digital transformation that is sweeping across governments and in higher education and across organizations as well, commercial businesses, et cetera, we have to keep the open, we must keep up with the pace of change in cloud adoption and usage. Interesting fact is that in 2018, there was a prediction that by 2021, 35% of all enterprise workloads would be in public cloud applications. Today, it actually stands at 50%, with expectations of additional gains of 7 to 10 percentage points in the next year. So Fortinet produces a cyber threat predictions, and in 2021, our last white paper said that threat actors are shifting significant resources to target and exploit emerging network edge environments, which is really what Zero Trust is designed to secure. Securing these new environments, including new technologies and converging systems, is more challenging than it may seem. So while we've seen an expected spike in attacks targeting novice remote workers and vulnerable devices that are exposed just to gain network access, we're also beginning to see new attacks that are targeting the connected home networks. Automating connections should be easy and secure, and in many cases, enabling single sign-on technologies and frameworks supports the growing need to support that working from anywhere. As a network device, applications and workflows cross over and through each other to deliver smarter services, more critical processes can be affected by a breakdown anywhere in the network. Not knowing where your applications and users are working from will increase stress when application processes and applications themselves begin to fail. So many experts are predicting the even larger push to move workloads to the cloud. If you're in the middle of your transformation, what this signals is that the sooner you complete that transformation and get yourself into a secure cloud environment, the better you're going to be. Cloud adoption includes the need to secure data and control access wherever the data lives at that moment in time, whether it's in the cloud and a private or hybrid cloud infrastructure or in the data center. Understanding where the data is, who gets access, and from which device must be part of our foundational security checks. So obviously the building blocks of Zero Trust are fairly straightforward. You need to know who the user is and what devices they will normally connect from. You need to know what resources they are allowed to access via that device, and ultimately to know where the applications live and what the user is allowed to do once they get to that application or to the resource. With zero trust, no devices are allowed to connect or to corporate resources just freely. Instead, any user or device requesting access must provide validated credentials. Even then, they are only permitted access to minimally required resources needed to do their job. So being denied all unvalidated traffic by default, bad actors and compromised devices can't even ping the networks, which is a good thing. And that means they're not exploring, they're not probing the enterprise for things to exploit. So when we think about zero trust, I basically described it from the 30,000 foot level. And Andrew is going to maybe drill down just the next level here in zero trust and really specifically focus on the workforce element. So Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I appreciate everyone coming. Thank you for kind of leading me into this, Bob. I'm going to kind of build off what he was talking about, but specifically pin into zero trust for the workforce. So MFA, Bob mentioned this, the perimeter has changed. We're no longer on premise connecting to protected applications. There are applications and users beyond that traditional perimeter or walled garden. So we need a way to protect your users along with those endpoints that they're using to drive for access. And with this change, there's also new threats that we see today as a result. 81% of breaches involve compromised credentials that target the identity. 54% of web app vulnerabilities have public exploits available to them that target applications. And also there's been a 300% increase in malware variants targeting IoT devices, all because of these changes. So we need to take a different approach, and that's with ZTNA or zero trust. The traditional approach, your trust is based on the network location that an access request is coming from. But once attackers are in there, they can move laterally. They can go within the network and get to the crown jewels. And this doesn't necessarily extend security to the new perimeter of cloud, mobile, and hybrid environment. The zero trust approach goes beyond that. It's never trust, always verify. So trust is established for every access request, regardless of where that request is coming from. You can secure access across applications in your network and ensure only right users and devices have access, which honestly, this complements and extends on-prem security to support modern enterprises with remote users, BYOD, cloud apps, and hybrid environments. So how do we do this? Zero trust in truth is really a journey with MFA as the foundation. Here's some great steps you can follow along. Confirming user identities, gain access visibility, ensure device security, enforce contextual access policies, and then finally securing access to all applications. All of this is a part of the journey, and each step doesn't necessarily need to be taken, accordingly. However, you need to consider all of these steps. But essentially what this is that we're protecting the login event, the access event, with MFA, two-factor, strong authentication. This is the foundation of zero trust in a lot of ways, where we're ensuring that the user, upon authentication, is using the correct credentials, along with confirming an MFA event with a strong method. And there are a variety of ways. From a Cisco perspective, this is our process, but there's also other means too. Along with MFA, there are other methods to commit multi-factor events where you can configure options for each application or a group of users and really segment the type of access for the need. Today you're seeing wearables be able to receive an MFA event, or your mobile device, telephony options, maybe a soft token. Biometrics, they're going to be more prevalent with passwordless features coming out with other vendors, along with U2F security keys, hardware tokens, and other telephony options. So MFA provides flexibilities for users to still be able to conform to strong security standards. But MFA, of course, is the foundation. Zero trust is the framework. So how do we leverage our strong authentication to also enforce that ZTNA? We do this by enabling true secure access. By taking a zero trust approach to secure access across your entire IT environment, we can reduce risks before a breach happens. We can gain visibility into those devices and users to identify risks and indicators of a breach of trust. And we can reduce the attack surface, contain breaches to stop the attacker from lateral movements. And we do this in a few different ways by establishing policy-based controls. See who and what is accessing the application. And of course, segmenting your network and workloads by enforcing granular controls. So to build off this, we need to ensure that compromise cannot happen. 99% of vulnerabilities exploited will be ones known by security teams for at least 1 year. So even if MFA is a piece of that ZTNA puzzle, we still need to ensure those devices being driven for access are still up to date. Admins may lack the time to patch all corporate or managed devices. End users access data from personal unmanaged devices, or end users don't want admins to take control of personal devices. There's a lot of variables, but we need to ensure that there are standards set so compromised devices can't access that protected data. And we do this by establishing trust at that login event. During the access, not just placing strong authentication or MFA there, but also making sure the posture of the device and the trustworthiness of the device is acceptable for access. Along with this access event, you're going to be able to see an inventory or get complete visibility into your devices. And this works great with MFA because we're happening at that login event. There's a lot of metadata that's being able to be pulled from that initial sign-in, like your operating systems, like your mobile device, like your browser, like maybe what your browser is using for plugins, or endpoint security agents. From this, we take this information, we take this knowledge, and we set these standards by enforcing adaptive policies or granular controls. And you can customize these policies for the need for your user base, maybe for a default global level, but you can drill into it to really assess the security and the need of that data and that access event. Again, using that policy, you can dig even deeper just with MFA, and you can ensure that that posture of the device being used has certain types of checks. Is it managed? Is it running up-to-date software? Is it encrypted? Is it passcode protected? Maybe a firewall on the application level, is that enabled? And then also maybe stacking biometrics on top to ensure that the correct user is authorizing that 2FA event. All of this to say, we are trying to improve the trustworthiness of user identities and the device being used upon an access event. And we do this through complete visibility into all your devices, your inventory, maybe things that aren't managed. You can see that along with MFA because you're protecting that access event. You can assess the security posture, so you can identify devices and if they are managed, or maybe they need to be enrolled and you need to control them, or maybe they're outside of your management and you still need to set standards. And then moving forward, you need to be able to continuously inspect and monitor the devices. So if there is a compromise, there is an infection of malware, we can provide a way to prevent this and also, mitigate that issue. So I was focusing primarily on Cisco's Zero Trust for the Workforce, which is MFA driven. However, there are other use cases for Zero Trust. There's also Zero Trust for the workload, so secure across multi-cloud tenants, along with the workplace, so for network visibility and segmentation. Thank you so much for the time. I'm going to pass it back so we can do some Q&A.
So Bob, you had talked about this kind of architectural shift in security, or how we approach security when it comes from a traditional approach into a zero trust approach. So how does the current security spend or security investment in infrastructure fit into a zero trust environment?
So that's a really good question. There are not a lot of people that are through with their zero trust migration, but a lot of people are thinking about it. So now it's a question of how are you resourcing for the future? Organizations that are not looking at least 18 to 30 months down the road are not going to be able to execute a zero trust transition from a financial standpoint unless you're a corporation with a lot of spare change in your back pocket. For public sector, higher education, K-12, and those are the organizations I have the most familiarity with. It's almost a 3-year adventure to get there. So it really starts with understanding what your current access is and what your current resources are, and then decide how you're going to do, as Andrew said, secure the individual and secure the endpoint, which the device security is ultimately one of the most important factors in zero trust.
Yeah, and Andrew, from your experience, do you typically see organizations starting with MFA if they're starting that zero trust migration, or is it in another area where you've seen like the first adoption? If you want to speak to that.
Yeah, of course. Good question. Always MFA first, protecting that login event. Plus, once you do that, you're going to be able to record that metadata of that event and then make better decisions on what else you would like to layer into that event.
And I guess as a follow-up then, if an organization has adopted some type of MFA implementation and rollout, and they're looking to then advance their zero trust journey. I know you had your last slide up there of the other areas. Is there a set or a defined place that you would go next, or is that open more to based on the requirements of the organization?
Yeah, it can go either way. Of course, you can come to a trusted vendor, see what their product is, and see what their resources are to improve your zero trust approach. Or you could look at your own type of controls, see what you want to build off on, see how you want to improve the user experience as well. So it can go either way.
And then Bob, you would mention in one of your slides this concept of working from anywhere and using single sign-on to be able to streamline those access events. Is there a balance there between MFA authentication and SSO, or what types of events or access do you typically want to use a single sign-on versus challenging a user or presenting that type of second factor of authentication in that login event?
Yeah, so normally you think about access as one device at a time, one service at a time, and where SSO would help you out is if you had them if you had the network architected so that once you're inside of the perimeter and you're accessing the things that are within your normal sphere of work, then you wouldn't have to continue to re-authenticate. But where you will need to do that is in those complex environments where you're logging onto the base network from your home network. You've established the secure channel in based on your identity and the device you're connecting from. And then if that device is then matrixed to that set of things you do every day, you're sitting in a position to be authenticated. And where the single sign-on actually comes in is how do you get to those other devices inside of your network, and do you have to go as a normal course of business, say, out to other resources that are maybe not within your network? Okay,
great. So we have a virtual question that came in, so I guess I'll ask that now. And I think, I guess for Andrew, this is for you. So the question is for passwords at financial institutions, how effective is MFA or two-factor authentication?
Yeah, MFA is always the last resort. So, I mean, if you have strong authentication, behind also good standards for passwords, it's only going to complement that security. For financial institutions, I mean, I'm from the public sector space, so I can't speak too directly to it. But what we see is when you put strong authentication with zero trust as a framework, you're less concerned about the need for strong passwords and extended passwords because you have means past that experience of just typing in the login event. You have detective controls along with that preventative MFA event.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, it also depends on how well your password policy has you set up for success in multiple environments that may have different standards.
Okay. And Andrew, you had mentioned, so this question was around financial institutions. You mentioned public sector. Are there, can you talk about the planning and the cultural adoption that you've seen and some examples of where MFA was placed into an organization and how that either disrupted or as little or as big as possible or as little as possible ideally, and then those different options. So where where you were seeing just a text or an SMS versus another type of authentication in those various environments.
Yeah, great question. So every IT or any end user is different on their technology experience, their know-how, their savvy. So with MFA, there is flexibility with what you provide as a method for committing a 2FA event. So what we try to drive people to is providing options that are secure and that also will be easy to use for those maybe tougher end users, or maybe if they're very technically sound, you can give them more something more advanced. However, where we see MFA going in a lot of ways is something called passwordless. So Cisco is working on a product with Duo, our MFA product, to enable a passwordless event where you're removing, the password from the login and replacing that with a biometric on the device itself. So you could leverage a Windows Hello or maybe a Touch ID or a security key as a way to commit a 2FA event without even needing to type in a password. So we're slowly seeing the industry kind of move away from strong needs and requirements for policies and passwords and moving towards really relying on the MFA event and having strong standards, preventative controls along with detective controls there.
All right. I'll open up to the live audience if there's questions for either Bob or Andrew right now. Otherwise, we have a couple more virtual questions. Jeff?
Okay. I have a generic question.
Sure.
And this can go to all the panelists, not just for you two, because everyone's talking about the amount of metadata and logging, and this also came back from Brian. So how much data is that data, and how long do we retain that data as a form of good policy, and where do we keep that data? Because if somebody's smart about breaking in, I'm assuming what they're going to try to do is wipe that out as well.
So I'll go ahead and just offer my thoughts on that. That data retention policies have to include metadata at some point. And so how long do you normally retain just run-of-the-mill data that would be a convenient target or an easy target without backing it up to a different source and therefore changing the metadata that comes attached to the new environment? I would also say that you're using that peripheral data to make sure you've authenticated the content of the data that you're storing. So kind of having it on just a little bit because it's really different based on the type of data and how much you retain, how long you retain. It really has to go with whatever your data governance policies are. If you don't have a good governance policy that identifies the data and specifically deals with, file and packet metadata, then you have to tune up your data governance policy to make sure that they're dealing with that.
So just to kind of continue on that note, being in the data protection space, so retention policies vary from organization to organization, right? So it really completely depends on that organization's policies, as well as, what compliancy they need to adhere to. There are some common practices on how long you should keep data, whether it be metadata or just any kind of data at all. I would say that the minimum amount of time you need to keep data is as long as it takes you to discover you need it. Right? So if you know it takes you 30 days before you realize that you need to recover something, then you should be holding data for that long, which really it depends on the security practices that you have in play, right? If you have a great security practice and you're able to discover that you need data within 3 days or 5 days or 7 days or 2 weeks, right? Then you're not going to rely as much on your retention as you would need to. But if you don't have a great security practice just yet, or that's still maturing, then the next best thing you can do is ensure that you have a lot of data retention so that you have something to go back to. So that's really all I have to say about that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just chime in on that. So back to your point and back to everyone's point, the retention policy is based on how it's going to be used. How are you going to use that data? Yeah. If you need to be able to search something, then you're going to have to make sure that that data is searchable. Just by encrypting it and having minimal metadata of some kind, does that mean you're going to get what you need? And that's going to be basically driven by compliance standards and what you actually have to prove or do on the back of it. So read those carefully, look at the guidelines, and then you'll be able to make a determination of what you need.
All right, so we have a virtual question, and I think this one is going to go to Andrew. So the question is how, I guess they want suggestions or your take on how to prevent a pass the cookie attack, or like a session hijacking that can bypass MFA.
Yeah, that's a great question. Layer on other detective controls for that access event. If that is a valuable protected app and you're concerned about like a cookie attack, then you can add other certificates or other types of insurance like hygiene checks and posture checks on top of that MFA to ensure not just the correct user is logging into that protected app, but they're accessing it from a trustworthy device. So that kind of adds on top of what we talked about with device trust.
Any other live questions for the panelists at this point? Okay. All right, I've I guess one more question from me. I guess for both panelists, that you were describing this, a shift to the cloud, and I know all of our panelists have kind of been speaking to that transition as well. So if you want to describe, Bob, if you want to describe Fortinet's approach, and then Andrew from Cisco's perspective, how you're approaching securing the cloud in your own fabric as it relates to zero trust.
So I guess I'll lead off here, and that is kind of one of those it depends sort of questions. A lot of organizations are really mid-transformation right now in their digital journey, and it really does depend on whether you're putting workloads up there, whether you're using SaaS applications, or whether you're even deploying infrastructures into the cloud. And if you are still midpoint, I mean, now would be a good time to be thinking about how you protect things in the cloud. Are you using a CASB-like capability to understand the transactions that are going back and forth between premise and cloud? Is the cloud that you're looking to secure and fortify, is that a private cloud or public cloud? And then again, it does take on a little bit of shape of who that provider is if it's in the public cloud. It comes back to, Google is one of the first to think about zero trust and one of the first to think about how to create that as a service, which we now call or know as Beyond Core. And so they understand how to get to that point a little bit easier than others. Cloud transition is not for the faint of heart, which is why there's a lot of organizations that have just kind of held off a little bit until it becomes that business imperative where, you can no longer afford, a collection of premise data centers. So you have to move workload over, or you have to just at least move data over, or even embrace the applications that are available in there. So you're not maintaining it on premise. I guess the thing that I would worry about is having that data focus as you're doing it. So what data are you moving? How are you moving it? That becomes the primary question in my mind.
Yeah, and to add on to that, from what we see at Cisco and Duo, we're a flexible integrator. So we're designed to layer in at the standard authentication protocol. So when you're really thinking about how to protect an app, whether it's on-prem or cloud, think about the way it's authenticating. So from a cloud perspective, SAML 2.0, it's going to be using assertions over HTTPS. It's a very common way to connect cloud apps. So that's how we're going to layer in to place multi-factor authentication. And again, we're a flexible integrator, so we're not concerned about one type of integration. Like, we're not just focused on just Cisco products exactly. We're focused on protecting that event. Along with that, you can also do other things like adding our policy and control and other types of visibility to make better standards. But what we see is that Duo extends security. So it doesn't allow you to, keep all your IAM attributes and passwords and authentication methods in one location. So it's just one central location for compromise. We separate that. So Duo is going to be kind of a way and extend security outside of your IAM solution. That could be on-prem or could be in the cloud, and it could be in both. So it just depends on where you are and where your needs are, and MFA can be inserted, at that authentication protocol.
All right, great. So if there's no further questions from the audience, I think Bob and Andrew, I want to thank you for your time and presenting and giving us more in-depth knowledge about not only this zero trust model and how it's it is the future and the shift towards how we're securing our environments, and then providing those examples and those ways to get started with those ways to secure, to kind of start that journey, as you guys were saying.